welcome to Fast Track, brought to you by Aera, the podcast where we help you get into your first home faster. I'm Chereè Kinnear with Aera founder Derek Handley, who went viral this month on the old TikTok and Instagram.
Awesome.
Yeah, after your appearance on Paddy Gower's podcast.
Plenty of fun.
It was, and I was lucky enough to be able to go and watch it as well, recorded live, but I don't think either of us anticipated so many comments. And so we're going to talk about that in this episode and why some of the stuff you said on the podcast made so many people mad. But first, here's the news. So last week, the government announced Budget 2025. Finance Minister Nicola Willis had her speech to Parliament, and there were a raft of changes to KiwiSaver. And obviously, that was the really interesting one when it came to particularly first-home buyers. As we know, that KiwiSaver contributes a pretty large chunk to most people's deposit. So some of those changes included moving the default contribution from 3% to 4% over the next few years, and obviously the employer matching that. First of all, did you expect that, Derek, or what were your initial thoughts?
I wasn't really paying too much attention, but then as they started kind of rumoring what they were going to do, I started thinking, oh, this could be really interesting. Because definitely ignoring anything to do with first home buyers, the country doesn't contribute anywhere near enough to KiwiSaver. But, you know, with the thousands of people we interact with regularly and the hundreds that we work with every week, they're almost all of them relying on KiwiSaver. So the more anyone's forced to put in money to KiwiSaver and the earlier they are able to contribute it, it's just going to continue to close that gap to make it more achievable for people to buy their first home.
We covered the changes on one of our little news clips on the Aera socials, which also popped off, and a lot of comments that were quite surprising to read. I think there were a lot of negative comments as well around it. And just to be clear as well, from my understanding, you don't have to contribute full, right? That would just become the default. If you can't
I think
afford
over time, there are exceptions and things like
Yeah.
that. But in any case, you can opt out of KiwiSaver entirely,
Right,
I think,
yeah.
right? So this is just if you are saving towards KiwiSaver and you want your employer to match you, which is kind of the free money part in a sense, then these are the new default settings. And most people do start on default settings and they continue on them or maybe increase them. So it's just important to continually lift that bottom layer so people are putting more into their KiwiSaver.
Yeah, because I think what fueled a lot of the negative comments that I noticed was the like, oh, well, people can't afford to do this or, et cetera. But as you say, there are options for people and you can opt out of it if you want to. But I think overall it's a really good thing. They're also extending it to 16 and 17-year-olds, which I think is awesome because it is one of those things that for people, I think it ticks away in the background. And as you say,
Exactly.
free money from your employer, which is great. But I know for me, even throughout my 20s, like I didn't really think about KiwiSaver. It just was there in the background.
Once you start on that train, you live within the money that comes out, and most people live within the money that they end up with, and a lot of them just spend it all. So if it's taken away before they even get to see it, it's just much more helpful psychologically for them to build those savings.
Yeah, definitely. I personally think good changes.
I would agree.
Yeah, and obviously changes a little bit on the projections. I know in the Aera book, The Fastest Way to Your First Home, talks about the average amount you'd have in your 30s and how that would be able to get you into a first home within a year. The projections now would be higher, right?
Definitely. So by the time you're 30, you're going to have a lot more. And we did some maths, which was looking at more like a living wage. So if you started off on the living wage and you stayed on that living wage, and maybe it grew by just inflation, just with this change alone, by contributing this total amount, which is 8%, within 10 years, you would have saved up enough to put down 10% towards a home that might be worth, say, 650 grand today, assuming that house price even grew 5% a year. So you're kind of getting more and more tools to catch up to the house price growth. So what I'm saying is if someone started on the living wage and they worked for 10 years and their salary only went up by inflation, in 10 years they'd have that 10% deposit, which is what people have been consistently saying is impossible. So just that one setting without any other savings that anyone ever had to do, if there were two people that had that combined, they could buy a house. And that's what I think people are trying to achieve.
Our next story looks at interest rates, which we know have been falling over the past few months. So as a result, BNZ says that it'll put $2.2 billion into the pockets of New Zealanders with a mortgage over the next 6 months to a year. So obviously that's good news for homeowners and also for first home buyers as well, who are possibly like a little bit nervous about getting into the market and what those interest rates will be. And also I think we're starting to see the gap between how much it costs to service a mortgage and rent is just closing, and people are quite surprised by, it's actually not that much more anymore when you look at the median rent in most cities. So I guess obviously that is $2.2 billion, obviously spread out among everyone. So it sounds like a big number. But overall, good news, I guess, for homeowners.
Yes, I mean, homeowners are going to do really much better this year, right? Finding extra money they didn't have before. But the main thing for first home buyers is, as you said, the rates coming down to the point where it becomes really close. Like, so if you look at just getting a $500,000 mortgage, you're talking somewhere around $600 a week. So that's almost like two people who might be paying rent as flatmates, a little bit more, and then you can buy a home. So that difference is now something you can't use as an excuse as to why you wouldn't buy a first home, where it's like so much more expensive to service a mortgage. Actually, the maths is much closer now.
Yeah, I know even in a place like Auckland, last time I checked, it was about $100-ish more for a mortgage on a $650,000, $700,000 house. So
Right.
It really opens up, I guess, the door of possibility for people, especially with them slowly going further down the interest rates.
Exactly. And so if you were single and you were buying a home and you could afford that, you would then contribute the border in, who would be paying the $250 to $300, and you then are talking about, the difference being $50 to $100 a week for that rent to mortgage ratio.
Next up, Derek, you pissed off a lot of Kiwis last month. I don't know if you're aware.
I was just being honest, Chereè.
I don't know if you expected quite so many comments and backlash online, but it came after you appeared on Paddy Gower's podcast, This is the Effing News, to chat about your new book that's now available. You spoke about one of the core realizations in the book and also a key message that Aera is really trying to push, and that is that the average couple in their 30s earning the average wage with the average KiwiSaver can get to their first home within a year. And that was exactly the snippet that was cut and put out onto socials.
Yeah, and I still 100% stand by it.
Do you want to start off by actually telling me exactly what you worded, what you said, just to give everyone a little bit of context about that storyline?
Yeah, so basically I was saying that the average wage for a 30-year-old or the median is around 30. So first of all, people started arguing about, you can't take the average because there's a whole bunch of people that don't earn the average. So then I said, okay, use the median. It's higher. So that doesn't work for you. So the average was 33. The median is actually more like 35. That was the first thing. So that's around $69,000 a year as a salary. So you have two people earning that. It's obviously just about to 150K. The next thing I said is from Stats New Zealand, the average KiwiSaver balance at 30 is around 22,000. So if you've got two Kiwis who have that, they've got 44,000. And then I said you can buy a house almost anywhere in New Zealand for around 600. You can buy it in many places for less, especially if you're just a couple or two people and you need just one bedroom. And so if you put 44, you only need 10%, which is around 60. So now the gap is, 16. I said that Aera contributes 10, so now you need 4. Or 6, sorry. So that's the thing that I think people just really struggle to believe because it's too simple.
Yeah, but you've laid out the math, which is what baffles me.
I did lay out the maths in the full interview, but the clip didn't lay out the maths, so the maths started to play out in the comments. And people have problem with every part of the maths being, you can't buy anything for $550, you can't buy anything for $600, you can't buy anything for $650. And those people just haven't taken the 30 seconds to look at Trade Me, where if you did look across the country, there are thousands of homes available for less than those figures. And if you go for the brand new route, so you only need 10%, there are hundreds, in every part of the country. So people don't take the time to just look into the facts. They rather their biases and their baggage and their history kind of cloud, to support their story, to support their angle versus think, hang on, maybe there's an opportunity to rethink what I understand.
I do want to pull up a few of the comments, so I'm going to work my phone out really quickly because some of them are really interesting to go through. And I don't think a lot of people can appreciate that you spent most of that following Saturday morning sitting on your couch replying to all of these comments because I know that it probably frustrated you as well to see a lot of people trying to pick it apart and being like, well, here's actually what the context is.
Lesson in patience, because obviously I've looked at it seriously, so I know it stands up. So I want to help people try to understand it, but you can't help certain people who don't want to know,
Yeah, and I think one thing that I've noticed in the comments again here is that when you mentioned the income and that people can save that amount of money, people were saying, yeah, but they're paying rent, so their whole income's not being saved. But what you meant to say was obviously that includes like living expenses, right?
Right, because I'm talking about your KiwiSaver balance, which comes out anyway, unless you're self-employed or you've opted out of KiwiSaver. I wasn't saying that you had to save on top of that. And then they're saying they're paying rent. Well, once you buy a house, your rent then contributes to your mortgage, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not really the same argument. I wasn't saying you saving the $44,000 on top. I was saying that's there because you've been working for 10 years.
And you did mention before about people just not taking the time to maybe look at what is available. There's one of the comments, and we actually reposted this onto our socials, said, key phrase, brand new anywhere in New Zealand, which is what you were saying about where you could get these houses. They're saying, which is code for a small town with no jobs or on the outskirts of a big city in a tiny house with 2 bedrooms with 1.5 hour travel time each way to work, sick of the half-truths and bullshit that these people peddle.
Yeah. So this is just someone who has zero ability to like check themselves and do any sort of research whatsoever, which would only take them 30 to 60 seconds. So obviously we know of houses and we help our own customers get into houses in big cities like Christchurch or Auckland, across those cities in dozens and dozens of neighborhoods. So we're not talking about small towns. Actually, it might be harder because people aren't actually building that many new builds or new houses in those towns. And in somewhere like Christchurch, you're not talking about tiny boxes. You're talking about single level houses. In Auckland, yeah, you are talking about more smaller footprints, but that's the reality of the big city. Like that's just life now. We're not in the 1970s.
I do want to expand this conversation slightly into the mindset side of things because we like to talk about that on this podcast. But what really interests me is you read comments like that, and even though you can show them examples and back the math up and be like, this is how it's done, they don't want to be convinced otherwise. And I think that's really interesting in this space with when it comes to buying your first home. A lot of people are like, this is just the way it is. You cannot convince me otherwise. Why do you think that is?
There's always a certain part of society that's had it difficult and it has been challenging, whether from their childhood all the way through to now, and nothing has worked for them and the system seems to be against them. And so you can become trained to just be judgmental and negative and always wanting to complain about the system. And it just gets you into like a routine of not being able to see an opportunity or think about facts versus your feelings. So that's probably one thing where people are just throwing stones straight away. I think the other thing is it's always easy to blame others for your problems, right? And so if you've spent too much or you don't earn enough, that is a you problem. You have to figure it out. Like you can start on minimum wage, but if you're still on minimum wage after 10 years, you have to look at yourself and figure out, well, why is that? Have I trained? Have I gone to school up? Have I tried to get a promotion? Have I tried to change jobs? Or have I just been in the same job for 10 years and haven't tried? You know, there are certain people that need a lot of help socially, mentally, and those kinds of things to get them ahead. But the vast majority of people have the skills, the mindset, the ability, if they put their mind to it, to improve their situation. So I think when people are not like that and they've been in the same situation and not doing anything about it for 1, 2, 3, 5 years, and they see comments like this, it's easy for them to just kind of shit on it. And that's what I think you see people doing.
Yeah, a lot of the comments I was reading through as well. I mean, people always talk badly of these new homes and these, starter homes or first homes, which are, ideally they're there so that you can get into the market and start out. And people just want to say, oh, well, this is crap and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, actually, there are a lot of people that have really, really worked hard to save up and do that. And they're on the path and they've gotten the market and they're starting to build equity and move toward the dream home. And people are just being like, ooh, you live in a terrible townhouse and blah, blah, blah. But then half of them are living in a shitty little rental.
Yeah, I think any of them, if they were owners of those homes, would be extremely proud.
Yeah,
right. If they ever got themselves into one of those situations, they'd be like, "Wow, this is my home." So it's just tough because it's, I think, a lot of conflict in the mind where you feel like you're so far away, your life isn't working out. It's just easy to complain and throw things at other people. And Aera is built to help people to believe there's another way. And that might take some time, but it's primarily built for the people who are willing to make those sacrifices, who believe in themselves, are making the change in their lives, and really want to be the best version of themselves. And once they've made those commitments, we can find them a way into their first home. If you haven't psychologically already made that switch that you want to be the better person, and you want to work harder, and you want to upskill, and you want to spend less, and you want to get less debt, then it's much harder for anyone to help you.
Well, I know it was probably not the way you wanted to spend your Saturday, replying to lots of comments.
I tell you what, it was fascinating to me to learn how little people knew about what it takes, how little people knew about what a first home price actually is, how little people knew about what minimum wage and what medium wage is. So people were saying, $100,000 as a couple, that's crazy. Who earns $100,000 as a couple? And so it's quite shocking, I think, in the threads for me to reply, that's basically 2 people earning minimum wage. Mm-hmm. So if you don't earn $100,000 as a couple, then one of you's not working or you're both not working full time. Maybe that's a bit of a truth bomb that's difficult in New Zealand to think. $100,000 a year is not a lot anymore. It's basically minimum wage.
Yeah. And I think that examples like this video, what make them really good is at the end of the day, even though it can be frustrating sometimes when people just don't want to hear you out or even change your perspective, it creates conversation. So I think it was really cool to see that conversation being had and watching other people engage with each other and try and convince each other of their perspective. So
yeah, and there were quite a lot of families, not anywhere near as many because they don't get involved in the comments as much, that were saying, I've done it and I did it this way and he's right and houses are this much. My friend just bought one for 500. They're much fewer because that's just the way social media works. But it was interesting to see those people come in and actually, it wasn't about defending me or anything. It's like, no, these are the facts. You're just ignoring them. So we need more of those people to tell their stories because those are the people that make this believable. You know, it's harder for me because people look at me and have lots of different views and ways to attack and pull me down. But if you're just hearing some other couple in New Zealand who's done it themselves, then you're less able to kind of pull them down.
Well, we might have pissed off a few more people in this podcast, Derek, but thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of Fast Track. If you loved it, chuck us a follow on our socials, fasttrack_pod, or send this on to a family member or a friend, and we'll catch you next time.